switch over. Well, welcome to Kopernik Observatory. Welcome those watching on the live stream. Great to have you here and here. My name is Drew Desker. I'm the director here at Kopernik. It's great to see some familiar faces here and also some new faces, so welcome. Every Friday night, when there's not a pandemic going on, we always do some sort of a public program. It's not always about astronomy, and it's really an opportunity to do sort of some lifelong learning for everybody. It's something really that we really value and want to continue doing. It's great because it also it opens our eyes to things that we never thought we would otherwise be familiar with, or starts us to think about new things. So tonight's program is definitely going to be a newer one for us, and we're really looking forward to it. We're also very much looking forward to the fact that the skies are going to be clear, and we've been sort of had a bit of a drought of that as of recent, and so tonight's going to be actually lovely for that. There will be some globular clusters and some groupings of galaxies that we plan to put into our scopes. And we have a rule here at Kopernik that you cannot leave until you look through a telescope. We'll track you down. All right. So make sure after the program that we head outside and get a chance to look through our scopes. Not only at some of the deep sky objects, but there may be even some satellites that'll be flying by. So we'll check those out as well. So for those that are watching on the live stream, again, it's great to have you with us. And as always, you can put your questions in the chat in the live stream, and then at the end of the presentation, when it's sort of Q&A time, then we'll take questions from here, with the in-person audience, but also your questions in the chat will also be presented to the to our speaker. So anyway, with that. Seán is actually Seán's you've been a member for now another year or two at least.
About half a year maybe.
Okay, all right. Well, but it seems like I've seen you up here a lot.
Yeah. And
which is a good thing. I'm just to be clear. Boy, he comes up here all the time. But it was only later, as we got into a discussion, I found out, what he's doing. He's a Ph.D. candidate at Binghamton University, and so, well, what are you studying? And then discussion ensued, and he proposed this talk, and again, I think it's really interesting because when you see something for the first time and you feel like you have to name it, what are you going to call it? Like same way that they talk about objects in the sky or whatever. So we are going to turn this over to, actually what I need to do here is turn on my projector. So I have to do a little more tap dancing before when the projector gets on, then we'll cut to his presentation. So let me see if I can get that started, at least on the live stream. All right, and is your mic on?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
All right, good.
So give it a second.
Sure.
As soon as we actually will.
Oh yeah. You guys can't see it, can you?
Can you get the satellites? There we go. Great. And.
Well, as it's coming on, how's everyone doing tonight? Wonderful to good weather finally. Clear skies tonight. I'm going to take the mask off. I hope you guys don't mind. I've been teaching with the mask on for 2 years now, and I just don't want to do it ever again. It's hard to do. For the people at home, I'm sure you'd rather see my mouth or my face rather than just seeing a black piece of cloth.
It's
being very, very sloth-like, very slow.
You'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. So,
moments from now.
How many of you have gone to go see the sloth that's at the Ross Park Zoo here in Binghamton? That was one of the first places I went after I came out here. Not the same species as the ones I'm talking about. Hey, there we go. I'm talking about three-toed sloths. thus the close encounters of the three-toed kind. But it's still a sloth. You know, sloth is a sloth is a sloth. So there you go. So this is the first specimen of a three-toed sloth that appeared in a book of science in Europe. This one was encountered sometime between November 30, 1555 and January 30, 1556 in Guanabara Bay in Brazil, today Rio de Janeiro. Little known, but the French were the first ones to colonize what is now Rio de Janeiro. They went to Brazil. I'll just move ahead here. A little bit of geography for you guys here. So the first Europeans to go to Brazil were the Portuguese. They ended up at a place here I marked down as Salvador, which was the Portuguese colonial capital. They landed there in 1500. A few years later, a French explorer by the name of Gonaville made it to this red dot here, São Francisco do Sul, in 1504. Though his voyage is somewhat apocryphal, no one really knows if he was actually there, but the locals like to claim he was there because that says that they have an older history than other parts of that country. The reason why these Europeans are going to Brazil, the reason why they're sailing 6 months of the year to go to a place on the far side of the world, far side of the earth, is because of a particular type of tree that grew in Brazil called Brazil wood in English. And Brazil wood produces a very strong red dye that was worth a hell of a lot of money back in the day. The average ship would carry the equivalent of 20% of the Portuguese imperial economy per year from Brazil back to Europe. So when the Portuguese find this, the French say, I want this too. You know, this is a great market we can break into. So the French try and come down into Brazil, and they set up a colony where the yellow dot is Guanabara Bay. They called it France Antarctique, Antarctic France, because it was the opposite of the Arctic. It was tropical. That's how they understood Antarctic at the time. Not really anything to do with penguins. And so in all of this, they're really there just to get the wood. They're there just to cut down the trees and to take them back to Europe and to melt them down and to get the dye out of them and use that for cloth and make lots of money. At the same time, they find animals like the sloth. And so the first mention of a sloth in European history is by this gentleman, André Teve, 1516 to 1590. He was a Franciscan priest for the first half of his career. He left the priesthood after returning from Brazil and became the royal cosmographer of the French court. A cosmographer is like a geographer mixed with a historian, mixed with an astronomer, mixed with an ethnologist. It's a whole bunch of different things bundled into one thing. It's the whole cosmos, kind of, you might say. And so Teve wrote a book called The Singularities of France Antarctique, which by the end of this decade you can find it on bookshelves. I'm getting a translation of it published, hopefully. And in that book, chapter 52, he talks about a sufficiently strange beast, which he calls a how, H-A-U-T, as you see up there with the diaeresis on the U. That is, according to him, a phonetic spelling of the name of the animal that was given to it by the indigenous people. So he is giving it the name that is used by the local people who are called the Tupinamba, as opposed to calling it a sloth. So he calls it a how, originally. That name then gets picked up by this gentleman, Conrad Gessner, who was the father of kind of early modern natural history. He wrote a book in the 1550s called The History of Animals, multi-volume book. And when he translated that into German, the German book is called Tierbuch, published in 1562. He started to include American animals that had not been introduced to Europe when The History of Animals was first published in Latin. And among those animals, he included the how, the sloth. Only he wanted to make it more scientific sounding. So he wasn't going to give it this pesky Native American name. So instead, he called it Arctopithecus. Those of you who might know any Greek, Arctos, bear, Pithecus, monkey. So to him, Arctopithecus, it was a bear-like ape. That was the way that he describes it. That's the way that he names it. And that's the kind of quasi-scientific name that lasts up until Carl Linnaeus, who's the father of modern taxonomy. We'll get to that in a minute here. So taxonomy is the field, it's the science that this is talking about. It is I like to talk about this in terms of etymologies. I know a couple of you are familiar with my advisor here in Binghamton. He is big into etymology as well. I think it's a good way of making sense of things by saying this is the origin of the word. So the origins of taxonomy. Nomos, the end of it, is Greek for law. There are a number of books I've looked into that are called hoi nomoi, that are Greek books of laws for my research. Taxa, medieval Latin for to judge, to appraise, or to value. This is a bit of a false etymology I'm throwing in here to see if any of my fellow scholars are paying attention, because this would mean I'm talking about tax law, which is not the case. Really, instead of the medieval Latin taxa, you have the ancient Greek taxis, or taxes, as the origin of the tax part of that, and that is for ordering or arranging. And so that then means that this is a fancy way of saying it's the science of classification. So taxonomy, it is the way that we name things, we classify things. And within classifying, you're giving it a name, of course. So I like to say it's answering the question of how do we understand life, first and foremost. How do we make sense of life, of new life, of old life, take your pick. And more specifically, if you want to go off of this etymology, how do we classify life? How do we put it into its place within the whole tree of life that exists throughout what we know so far? So there are two main descriptions that are given of the sloth in the 1550s, both by André Thévet. The first of these on the left, d'une bête assez étrange appelée au, and then on the right, de la bête au qui ne vit que devant. I'll give you the translations in a second because I ordered these in the wrong way. So on the left there, that's from 1557. And on the right is from 1575 when Thévet wrote his own book called The Universal Cosmography, where he was trying to describe everything that is known on the Earth as of 1575. So what these translate to, on a sufficiently strange beast called hay, and hay is a better translation of the actual indigenous name I for the animal. And then on the right, it's a beast, the hay, that only lives on air, which is the most curious thing you could say about an animal, because you think about it, every animal needs to eat and to drink to survive, right? You need water, or you need food to continue moving, to continue going. Thévet actually had a sloth captive. It was stunned by a couple of French soldiers in the forest, and they took it back to the French camp on an island in the bay, and Thévet kept it in his hut for 26 days to observe it. And during the time that it was in his hut, it never ate or drank. And so he thought, that must mean it lives only on air. Bless you. That must mean it lives only on air. Not that it's terrified and you don't know what kind of food it eats, and that it's too scared to drink. It's a different way of thinking about things, I guess. The more curious part about this, as I was reading today to double check all of my facts, is that on the next page in this same book, where he talks about it living only on air, he also says that there's a specific tree whose leaves it's known to eat. It lives only on air, but it also eats these leaves from this tree. André Thévet is a very unreliable narrator, and that makes him even more fun to study. He's not the best scientist ever. So, but the fact that he calls this is a beast that lives only on air makes this the most singular, the oddest of animals, strangest of animals that anyone has encountered in Europe, or in the Americas, sorry, in the period. So, moving forward by a couple of centuries, in the 18th century, Carl Linnaeus, who you can see here on the left, he was a Swedish naturalist. He is the father of modern taxonomy. He is the one who begins the process of coming up with the two-part names for all species of life, right? So, canis canis, right? Or, not canis canis. I'm thinking it, whatever, you know what I mean. So, he starts to do that. He decides Arctopithecus doesn't work for this animal because calling it a bear-like ape doesn't really narrow it down to say what this exactly is. And you're supposed to be able to read the taxonomy and say, oh, I know what that is. So instead, he looks at it and thinks, well, what can I take from the actual physical animal and say these are the specific things that people should recognize most about it. And so he says, first, I'm going to call it Bradypus for the genus. And Bradypus is a combination of two Greek words. Bradus means slow, and pus means foot. So it's a slow-footed animal. Okay, that makes sense. It's already been called sloth by this point. The French called it the Portuguese called it a preguiça, which is Portuguese for sloth, way back in the 1550s as well. So it calls it Bradypus. So that's the genus. So then the species name, though, because you got to distinguish a three-toed sloth from a two-toed sloth. So how does he do that? Simple. He gives it the name Tridactylus. And Tridactylus is, again, Greek, three, dactyl, finger, toe. So it's the three-fingered, slow-footed animal. You see that, you think, oh, that could be a sloth. Or eventually you figure it out if it's charades and you're saying, what have you. So that is how the modern name of the sloth comes to be. The actual species that Teve recorded in 1557 in his Singularities was the maned sloth, which is today Bradypus torqatus. And I'm saying that now because it was just in the last week I was able to confirm that. So I've been trying to identify that sloth for a good while. When this is the best image of it, it's hard to identify it. Nonetheless. So, yeah, three-fingered Bradypus, slow-footed, three-fingered animal. All right, so taxonomy, the big thing to know about taxonomy is it reflects the culture of the people who are identifying things. It reflects the culture of the people who are classifying things. So, you could be really silly and say someone who supports a rival baseball team, call them homo stupidus or something like that, the stupid person. Or, you might say that the future of humanity going out into the stars is Homo galacticus, and we're saying that because we're going to go out in the galaxy, following Perseverance back there on the wall there. So taxonomy reflects culture. So for someone like Teve in the 1550s, for these explorers and writers in the 16th century, they are identifying these animals in the best way they can make sense of. And for him, rather than trying to give it a European name, that is something, like saying, oh, it looks like this creature from Greek mythology, he says, no, they already have names for it in the Americas. Why should I give it a separate name when they already have something that works? Why don't I just borrow that name in and say this is what they call it? On the other hand, though, the Portuguese naturalists, who were also in Brazil, further to the north, they would say, well, this is the native name of the animal, but we call it this. So they would say, the natives call it the eye, we call it the preguiça. They call it the eye, we call it the sloth. And all of the connotations with the word sloth, being very slow, it's one of the 7 deadly sins. So that adds a lot of extra layers onto the animal that don't exist on there when you use the native name, like how the French did. So taxonomy reflects culture. Example here. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, right? That is our official scientific name for modern humans. And and then the non-scientific name is modern humans, right? Homo sapiens, modern humans. Homo, it is Latin for human. If you want to go into whether that's human or man, I have an episode of my podcast you can listen to from November that goes into that in great detail. Talk to me afterwards. And then sapiens, sapiens is a Latin participle from the verb sapiere, which means to discern. So someone who is sapiens is someone who is discerning, who is able to think for themselves, who's able to come up with ideas, to invent, to create art, to do things not just off of instinct. And so this is a name that we gave to ourselves. I do not know exactly when, but probably in the 19th century, early 20th century. This is a name that we gave to ourselves before we knew that there were other hominids who created art, Neanderthals, other hominids that intentionally buried their dead, like hominidali, that was just discovered a couple of years ago in South Africa. So our name for ourselves reflects our culture, and it reflects our effort to try and toot our own horns, right? Make ourselves look better. Another podcast episode I came up with recently was asking the question, are we really Homo sapiens? Are we really discerning and wise? Any case. So back to the sloth here then. Teve calls it a how. We call it a sloth. Another term that can be used to describe this animal, the sufficiently strange beast. I want to focus on that word strange. Okay, in English, you think about that as like it's. I have a cousin who has a podcast that's Strange Sisters, where it's all about the occult, stuff like that kind of thing. If you're watching, hello. The word strange in English comes from the Middle French word étrange, and most of the work I do is in Middle French. So it comes from étrange in French, which is the origin of the modern French word étrange. Anyone here speak any French or study any French? A few of you? So étrange, it means strange in French, right? It also means foreign. So when I was translating this phrase saying a sufficiently strange beast, I could have translated it as a sufficiently foreign beast, because it works in both cases. So you have this word strange, you have this word foreign. They're synonyms in a sense. There's another word that I think fits into this pretty well. So you have étrange, you have strange, you have foreign. I also have the word alien. And here's where I get into the close encounters of the three-toed kind, why I came up with that title, besides the fact it made me burst out laughing when I thought of it. My committee did not like it as much. But any case, so you have the word alien too. Now, the origin of this word comes from a Latin adjective, alienus, which is belonging to somewhere else. And that goes back to another Latin word, alius, which means other. I've seen alius more as alia in that form. I'm trying to remember what the context is. But so someone that is alien, something that is alien, it belongs to somewhere else. It is not from here. It is from beyond our world. And in this context, in the 1500s, in the first stage of exploration, the last time there were mass migrations of humans, when you're talking about a world, it is a sphere of influence. It is the Mediterranean. It is the Americas, different worlds in the Americas. It's different worlds in Asia and Oceania and Australia and such. I argue in my research, and I would say that this is something we can change in how we refer to old world, new world, that all of those are old worlds, and that the new world is when all of those are combined through forced assimilation, through conquest, through colonization. And that is when you find creatures like the sloth that are referred to essentially as alien for their day becoming something that's familiar and something that's a part of the culture, to the point that today, if you want to, there's a sloth emoji that I've used on occasion. You got the sloth in, was it Zootopia, Zootropolis, the animal movie a few years ago. So making something that is in one century alien into something that is familiar in another century. Before I go into the questions, I will say I've got one quick quote here I want to read to you, which I thought of. I saw this at dinner tonight, because when I'm not studying 16th century science, I am reading 20th and 21st century planetary science books for fun, because I'm a very big nerd. So this is by David Grinspoon. David Grinspoon is a planetary scientist, astrobiologist. He wrote a book called, I believe it's called Alien Worlds, came out in 2004. I'm reading it at the moment. And he has this quote here in there. So, home is where the heart is, and wherever we travel, Earth shines back at us, the beginning and the end of all our journeys, the standard by which worlds are judged. So for us, our world, home, is the Earth, right? We have progressed to such a point that we are kind of at a point where we have a global world. In the 1500s, home, that world is Europe. It's the Mediterranean. It's the things that are familiar. And so I want to argue that we can learn from the escapades of these explorers 5 centuries ago and say, what did they do last time around that we can either improve upon or not do this time around? You know, with the clean rooms, for example, I'm looking again at Perseverance in the back corner. I drew that they had that in the clean room for a long time before they put it on the rocket to send it to Mars. So they weren't going to contaminate Mars with life from Earth, right? So when they eventually pick up the samples, they're hopefully not going to have too much bacteria from Earth on them. kind of similar in a sense to when we go out there, eventually, when our descendants go out there, let's make sure that they don't go in and conquer and destroy civilizations, or that they don't destroy what might happen to exist on other worlds in the same way that Cortez did, or that the French did in Canada, and where I'm from in the Midwest. So I think there's a good message to learn in all this. So with that, I will open up to questions. Quickest Friday program you guys had in a while. So, any questions from anyone in the room? No? I was not able to... Oh, so the question is, do I have a picture of a real sloth? And my answer is that I was not able to afford to put one in there that was public to me. I looked into it. I had one. There's one in my dissertation. You can buy the book in a couple of years. But it cost me about $400. So it is about Renaissance natural history. The question, what is the topic of my dissertation? I'm writing about Renaissance natural history and the introduction of the Americas into European science through natural history, with sloths, Brazil wood trees, and tropical birds as my 3 examples that I'm using. So the question, did we kill all the Brazil wood trees? Almost. The Brazil wood trade almost collapses in 1570 through deforestation. And also because of disease and war and conquest, most of the native workers who were cutting down the trees were killed off as well, or enslaved, so they couldn't do it anymore. So when Brazil wood begins to decline, that's when the Portuguese start to import sugarcane, and they begin to kidnap people in Africa and enslave them and take them to Brazil. Mostly Portuguese. Oh, well, yes. Yeah. Yeah, so most... I believe it depends on where you're talking about. I know in terms of Brazil, the slave trade to there was coming from Angola, especially, and from Mozambique and other Portuguese colonies in Africa. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Were sloths in European foreign trade, like as like animals or like their hides in European clothing and such?
So the question, yes. The question is, were sloths seen in European trade? Was their hide, their fur traded? The first example of a sloth I know of that ended up back in Europe was in the early 1600s. There's one that the Dutch tried to go to Brazil after the French were kicked out, and they lasted for about 4 years before they got kicked out too by the Portuguese. They took a sloth back with them, but it didn't last very long. And so they're so rare, and I think because of the native peoples kind of treated them respectfully because they were harmless, and because of the long claws, they didn't really want to try and hunt them. So Europeans didn't really do that either. But the sloths tended to, especially the main sloth, they're endangered now because the forest was so destroyed. Yeah.
So did the Europeans like from this image here, they kind of look human-like.
Mm-hmm.
Did they initially try to eradicate the sloths?
So the question, did the Europeans try to eradicate the sloths initially? No, they just kind of thought they were strange. They were weird. They didn't know what to make of them. There are pictures from another number of other books, and I'm still waiting for an email back from the French National Library about using those pictures that depict sloths alongside the demons of the Americas, the native shamans and such. And there's a sloth in the background that has a very strange look on his face. Done by another Frenchman named Jean de Léry, who went to Brazil a year after Teve left. So, yeah, no, they kind of thought they were just strange. They didn't know what to make of them. Did the sloths end up on the menu? Yes, some were eaten. that gets talked about, but it's not very common. I don't think they're a really good source of protein. I don't believe. I can answer that question. Let me Right. I got it. So from what I have heard, they're about like, yay long-ish, not too wide, longer limbs. I saw a couple of videos recently. My dad likes to send me sloth videos on Reddit now, and there have been a couple lately where they seem like the size of a medium-sized dog, like an Aussie Shepherd or something, kind of the biggest. But some can be quite small, some can be a little larger. I've got the number 2.5 meters in my head for, I think, their length, which is, that sounds way too big. That may be something else. Yeah, that's too much. Teve tried to keep this as a pet, and it didn't work. He was trying to figure out why he's not eating. It's like every young person with their first fish or whatever. Why is this not eating? Why is it not drinking? And I don't think this is going to work as a pet. So they tried. It didn't really work. Three-toed sloths, there is only one three-toed sloth in captivity in the U.S. that's registered. It's in the Dallas World Aquarium. And they are very, very picky eaters, so it's hard to keep them in captivity. I was going to go to Brazil to look at some before COVID, and then, pandemic happened. So. Yes. They'll eat a larger variety of leaves. These sloths only eat leaves from one type of tree. Yeah, like koalas.
We do have a couple of questions from the live stream.
Oh, good.
So Tom Kane asks, do we know who called it a sloth first?
Thank you, Dad. Asking from good old Joplin, Missouri, where you guys are tonight. My dad is asking, who's the first one to call it a sloth? So the two-toed sloth is the first type of sloth that's called a sloth. And they were first encountered by the Spanish in Costa Rica and Peru way back in the 1520s, 1526, I believe, is the first mention of them in the Natural History of the Indies by a guy named Oviedo. And he calls it a pericolingero, which is, I believe, one like regional dialectal Italian version of sloth. It comes out to that somehow. I'm looking at my Italian friend sitting in the front row here, second row here. So, yeah, sloth first appears for a two-toed sloth, 1526. Three-toed sloth, they get called that in 1560 by José de Anchieta, who was the lead Jesuit for the Portuguese in Brazil. He's a saint today in the Catholic Church. And he called it a preguiça in a letter that he wrote describing Brazil's wildlife. So, yeah. Thanks, Dad.
All right. Linda says, could lives only on air mean it stays up in the trees and not on the ground?
That's one possible interpretation. Yeah. That is one possible interpretation. I will say that from everything I've read, the idea that it lives only on air is that it actually only consumes air fits Teve better, because he had some wild ideas that don't make sense in a lot of ways. Right. It's called epithets, yeah. Teve was also notorious in his day. He was accused of plagiarism by almost every other member of the French scientific establishment in the period. And today, he is largely remembered as being a much lesser scholar compared to other French scholars who went to America, like Jean de Very, who I mentioned. So I'm kind of rehabilitating him because I think he's a really interesting guy.
Only in Antarctica, who's actually from Toronto, asks,
Ooh.
How long does a sloth live up to?
I'm not sure. That is something to look into. I have not found any information on that yet. So, and I'd be curious how long they live I know they can go about a week without eating. I have read that in multiple places. So, 26 days. That's that's a little under the month of February, let's say. So, that's a long time.
Would you say that sloths in general are an endangered species?
Yes. Yeah, specifically certain types, like the main sloth, the one that Teve met, that is endangered for sure. There's another one, Bradypus variegatus, the brown-throated sloth that is also endangered. You can see one of those at the Smithsonian.
Yeah, how many species are there of sloth?
There are 4 3-toed sloth species and 6 2-toed. And of the 3-toed, I believe only about 2 of them are really left of the 4. There are 2 that are very, very, very badly endangered, and then there's the main sloth and the brown-throated that are my 2 candidates for who I thought this one could be until I confirmed this week it was a main sloth.
So they're only in Central and South America?
Yes. And I was going to put a slide into here. I've been going back and forth about this all week. Because I was going to put a coda in, because they figure out this animal. Then you go down the line by another century or so, and they come across the fossilized remains of a ground sloth, of a giant sloth. And so how do they eventually decide that that is a sloth like this animal? And ground sloth, the giant sloth from the Ice Age, that's not an ancestor of these sloths. It's a cousin of these sloths. But the idea was I was going to put a slide in that would have a picture of a ground sloth skeleton, and then this picture on the other side of it, and say on the bottom, evolution's really mean sometimes. But again, they're not ancestor descendant, so I didn't do it. Yeah.
Who was the artist for this picture of sloth?
Supposedly Teve. The question is who drew this picture? Supposedly it was Andre Teve. Supposedly because, well, he drew a number of other pictures. All of his books are filled with images like this. But I kind of have a feeling, because he shopped out a lot of his writing, he hired a ghostwriter for all of his ancient Roman connections to make it look better. I was able to identify him over the summer, the ghostwriter. So I would imagine that this was potentially shopped out as well. But the description of the sloth that he includes underneath this picture is Teve's own depiction, or description. And that text is in all of the historical literature about sloths, of which there are 5 articles that have been written in the last century about sloths. They generally say that his description of the sloth was good, the picture was terrible. I think that this picture, it's a bear with the head of an Irish comedian named Dara O'Brien. Oh yeah, it's very anthropomorphized. Yeah. And he says that it has the wail of a small child who is upset. So, yes?
You mentioned the 3-toed, the sloths are endangered. Do we know how many are left in the wild of 3-toed sloths?
I'm not sure. That's a really good question, and I'm not sure of that. I think it's in the thousands last time I looked, and I haven't looked at that in a few years because it's not quite related to this. So, yeah, that's something to look into. I know a few people I can ask. Any other questions? Anyone else remotely?
Not so far.
Ballpark date for my dissertation defense, December 10th, 2022. I want to have it done before the end of the year. I want to have it done before my next birthday, which is a big one. And I would like to not have to be here next spring, because January and February in Binghamton is not a nice time to be here. I'm from Kansas City.
We'll miss you.
It's nicer. I know. This is the one great thing about Binghamton. I've really enjoyed this observatory, coming up here, meeting you guys. So, any other questions from the back?
Not currently on the live stream here, so I guess I'll mosey on up and
Cool.
invite you all to stick around. And again, as I said, the rule here is you can't leave until you look through a scope. But thank you, Seán. I really appreciate your time in putting this presentation together. And so again, we've got 2 scopes, actually 3 scopes in our observatory. So for those who are here for the first time, you're going to go through the lobby, through the set of double doors that are on the opposite side of the lobby. Take a left, and then there are 2 scopes in the actual observatory lobby. The one on the left is a 6-inch refracting telescope. The one on the right will be a 14-inch reflecting telescope. And then there is a 3rd scope, which is, Siri wants to talk to me, and I don't want to talk to Siri. we have a 20-inch reflecting telescope, and that scope we exclusively use for imaging. And one of the Kopernik Astronomical Society members, Patrick Manley, is here, and he's got the scope open, and we'll be starting to do some imaging. So if you've never seen sort of high-level astronomical imaging, you definitely have to check it out. It's not just take a picture and you're done. There's a series of long exposures that have to be done with different filters, and Patrick will tell you a little bit about how that works. So anyway, thank you again, Seán, for being here. Thank you all for coming, and we'd love to see you out in the scopes. Thanks.